The sound of shattering glass echoed through the quiet ranch house, jolting Emma awake. Her heart pounded as she sat up in bed, her eyes darting to the clock on the nightstand, 2:47 a.m. The house was dark, but the faint glow of the moon spilled through the broken window, casting jagged shadows across the floor. "Ben?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Grandpa?" No response. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The air was thick with tension, and every creak of the house made her pulse race. She grabbed the baseball bat leaning against the wall, a gift from Jack after he'd taught her how to swing last summer, and crept toward the door. The hallway was pitch black, but Emma's instincts screamed at her to move. She could hear muffled voices downstairs, low and menacing. Her grip tightened on the bat. As she tiptoed toward the staircase, her breath shallow and uneven. At the top of the stairs, she froze. The front door was wide open, and 3 figures stood in the living room, their silhouettes illuminated by the moonlight. One of them held a knife, its blade glinting ominously. Another was rifling through the drawers, tossing papers and photos onto the floor. The third stood in the center of the room, his arms crossed, his voice cold and commanding. "Find the old man," he said. "He's here somewhere." Emma's blood ran cold. She recognized the voice. It was the same man who had harassed the store clerk in town. The cartel. They had come for Jack. Before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth, and she was yanked backward. She struggled, her muffled screams drowned out by the chaos downstairs. But then she heard a familiar voice in her ear. "Quiet, Emma," Jack whispered, his tone calm but urgent. "Stay behind me." He released her, and she turned to see him holding a rifle, his eyes sharp and focused. Ben was crouched behind him, his small frame trembling with fear. "What's happening, Grandpa?" Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he motioned for them to follow him down the hallway, away from the stairs. Emma's mind raced as they moved silently through the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known Jack was a man of mystery, but this was something else entirely. They reached the back door, but before Jack could open it, the sound of footsteps on the stairs made them freeze. The cartel members were coming. "Go," Jack said, his voice low and firm. He shoved Emma and Ben toward the door. "Run to the barn and hide. Don't come out until I find you." "But Grandpa," Ben started, his eyes wide with fear. "Now," Jack barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emma grabbed Ben's hand and pulled him toward the door, her heart breaking at the sight of Jack standing alone in the hallway, his rifle raised and his expression grim. She wanted to stay, to fight alongside him, but she knew she had to protect Ben. As they slipped out into the night, the sound of gunfire erupted behind them. Emma didn't look back. She couldn't. She focused on the barn ahead, her legs burning as she ran across the yard, dragging Ben behind her. They reached the barn and scrambled inside, hiding behind a stack of hay bales. Ben clung to her, his small body shaking with sobs. Emma held him close, her own tears streaming down her face as the sound of gunfire and shouting echoed through the night. The next morning, the ranch was eerily quiet. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the wreckage of the house. The front door hung off its hinges, and the living room was in shambles. Bloodstains marred the wooden floor, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jack stood in the middle of the chaos, his face pale and his hands trembling. He had fought off the cartel members, but the cost had been high. Emma and Ben were safe, but the ranchie's sanctuary was no longer a place of peace. As he surveyed the damage, his eyes fell on a jagged symbol carved into the wall by the door. It was the same symbol he'd seen on the gangster's neck in town, a cartel mark. A warning. A promise. Jack's jaw tightened and his hands clenched into fists. The cartel had made a grave mistake. They had come for him, but they had underestimated him. And now they would pay. The morning sun cast long shadows over the ranch, its golden light doing little to soften the devastation. Jack stood in the wreckage of his home, his boots crunching against broken glass and splintered wood. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood, a grim reminder of the night's violence. His hands, still trembling from the adrenaline, clenched into fists as he surveyed the damage. Emma and Ben emerged from the barn, their faces pale and drawn. Ben clung to Emma's hand, his wide eyes taking in the destruction. "Grandpa?" he whispered, his voice trembling. What happened?" Jack turned to them, his expression softening for a brief moment. "It's okay, Ben," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You're safe now." But Emma wasn't convinced. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the jagged symbol carved into the wall by the door. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp with fear and anger. Jack's jaw tightened. "A warning," he said simply, "from the cartel." Emma's breath hitched. "The cartel? What do they want with us?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the wall, his fingers brushing against the rough edges of the symbol. It was a mark he'd seen before, a cartel's calling card, a promise of more violence to come. "They want me," he said finally, his voice low and grim. "And they'll do whatever it takes to get to me." Ben's lower lip quivered, and he buried his face in Emma's side. Emma wrapped an arm around him, her own fear giving way to a fierce protectiveness. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Jack turned to face them, his gaze unwavering. "We fight back," he said. "But first, we need to make sure you two are safe." Jack spent the next few hours fortifying the ranch. He reinforced the doors and windows, set up tripwires and alarms, and hid weapons in strategic locations. Emma helped where she could, her hands shaking as she hammered nails into boards and carried supplies. Ben stayed close, his small hands clutching a flashlight as he followed Jack's every move. "Grandpa," Ben said quietly as they worked, "are they coming back?" Jack paused, his hands tightening around the wire he was cutting. "Yes," he said honestly, "but I won't let them hurt you. Not again." Ben nodded, his trust in Jack unwavering. But Emma could see the fear in his eyes, and it broke her heart. She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "We'll be okay, Ben," she said, her voice firm. "Grandpa won't let anything happen to us." Jack watched them, his chest tightening with a mix of love and guilt. He had spent years trying to leave his past behind, to build a life of peace for his family. But now, that past had come crashing down on them, and he knew there was no going back. Meanwhile, in a lavish mansion hidden deep in the desert, Miguel Diaz sat at the head of a long table, his cold eyes scanning the faces of his men. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of cigar smoke and expensive cologne. On the table in front of him lay a map of the area, with Jack's ranch marked in red. "This old man," Miguel said, his voice low and dangerous, "has cost us too much. He humiliated my men, destroyed our outpost, and now he thinks he can hide behind his fences and his guns." He slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses rattle. "I want him brought to me, alive." One of his lieutenants, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, leaned forward. "Boss, he's not just some old man. He's trained military, maybe. He took out 6 of our guys without breaking a sweat." Miguel's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then we'll make it personal. Hit him where it hurts. Take his family. Make him watch as we destroy everything he loves." The men nodded, their expressions grim. They knew better than to question Miguel's orders. But as they filed out of the room, one of them lingered, his eyes darting nervously to the map on the table. "Boss," he said hesitantly, "what if he's ready for us? What if he's expecting an attack?" Miguel's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Then we'll give him a fight he'll never forget." Back at the ranch, Jack stood on the porch, his rifle resting against the railing. The sun was setting, casting the desert in shades of orange and red. He could feel the tension in the air, the calm before the storm. The cartel would come, and when they did, he would be ready. Emma stepped out onto the porch, her arms crossed against the cool evening breeze. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "what happens if they come back?" Jack didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "They will come back," he said finally. "And when they do, we'll be ready." Emma nodded, her expression hardening. "I'm not afraid," she said. "Not as long as you're here." Jack turned to her, his gaze softening. "You're stronger than you think, Emma. Both of you are." He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "No matter what happens, remember that." As the night deepened, Jack prepared for the battle to come. He checked his weapons, set up traps around the perimeter, and made sure Emma and Ben were safely hidden in the basement. The cartel had made a grave mistake by coming after his family, and now they would learn the hard way that Jack Steele was not a man to be trifled with. The night air was thick with tension as Jack crouched behind a rusting fuel drum, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the cartel compound. The facility was hidden deep in the desert, surrounded by towering walls topped with razor wire. Armed guards patrolled in pairs, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jack inhaled slowly, adjusting his grip on his knife. The only way in was through the back, the less fortified entrance used for smuggling shipments. He had studied cartel tactics in the past, and their arrogance was their weakness. They weren't expecting a man like him. With swift, practiced movements, he scaled the wall, using the shadows to mask his approach. He landed soundlessly inside the compound and pressed against the nearest building, scanning for threats. His fingers brushed against the cold steel of his silenced pistol. One by one, he eliminated the outer guards, dragging their bodies into the darkness before setting small, time-delayed explosives near fuel tanks and electrical panels. Chaos would be his greatest weapon. Inside a dimly lit cell, Emma sat on the cold floor, her wrists raw from the tight rope binding them. The stale air smelled of sweat, blood, and gasoline. She knew she had little time if Jack was coming. He needed a distraction. She had already palmed a rusted metal shard from the ground, working it against the ropes. Sweat dripped down her temple as she fought against the fibers digging into her skin. The door creaked open. Miguel's second in command, a scarred man with cruel eyes, entered, grinning. "You really thought your grandpa could protect you?" he sneered, grabbing her chin roughly. Emma didn't hesitate. With all the strength she had, she slammed her head forward, smashing his nose. He cursed, stumbling back. That split second was all she needed. Twisting her wrists, she finally tore through the restraints and grabbed the keys from his belt. She sprinted into the hallway, her heartbeat hammering as she ducked behind crates. Footsteps thundered behind her. If she didn't move fast, she'd be dead. Jack planted the final explosive just as the first siren blared. Shots rang out as he took down another guard, his movements precise, controlled. He was a ghost in the night, striking before they even knew he was there. The first explosion rocked the compound. Fire erupted from the fuel station, sending flames licking up into the night sky. The facility plunged into darkness as the power was cut, and screams of confusion filled the air. Jack moved fast. Weaving through the smoke-filled corridors, he reached the prison section, and then he saw her. Emma, breathless, standing at the end of the hallway, a ring of cartel guards closing in around her. Jack didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The first man fell instantly, the second spun from the impact, and the third barely had time to react before a bullet ripped through his chest. Emma ducked behind a crate as Jack advanced, taking down the last two in quick succession. "Are you hurt?" Jack asked, gripping her shoulders. Emma shook her head, trying to catch her breath. "We need to go, now." They ran. The compound was in full chaos fire, shouting, and gunfire turning it into a war zone. Jack led Emma through the wreckage, but more cartel enforcers were closing in. A bullet whizzed past them, hitting the ground inches away. Jack fired back, grabbing Emma's hand as they sprinted toward the exit. A black SUV sat idling nearby. Keys still in the ignition, someone had been preparing to leave in a hurry. Jack threw the driver's body to the ground and jumped in. "Get in," he barked. Emma scrambled into the passenger seat as the first wave of cartel gunmen emerged, opening fire. The SUV's tires screeched as Jack floored the accelerator, smashing through the compound gate in a hail of bullets. "Are they following us?" Emma gasped, twisting in her seat. Jack's jaw tightened as headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. "Yeah," he muttered. "And they're pissed." Back at the compound, Miguel Diaz stood amid the flames. His face twisted in rage as he watched the SUV disappear into the desert. His men were dead. His base was burning. And Jack Steele had taken his prize. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his lips. "This isn't over," he murmured. "Not by a long shot." His lieutenant staggered toward him. "Boss, what do we do?" Miguel pulled a phone from his pocket and dialed. "Deploy the hunters. I want Steele and the girl back, alive." His eyes darkened. "And this time, make sure they suffer." The black SUV roared through the desert night, its headlights cutting across the barren landscape. Jack's hands were tight on the steering wheel, his gaze flicking to the rearview mirror. No sign of pursuit yet. Emma exhaled heavily, her body still shaking from the firefight. "We can't outrun them forever," she said. Jack nodded grimly. "We won't have to." The ranch was waiting. And this time, Jack wasn't going to be on the defensive. was going to end this. Back at the ranch, Jack wasted no time. He reinforced the barricades, set up traps, and stashed weapons at key points around the property. Every bullet, every blade, every second counted. Emma worked beside him, her fear hardened into resolve. She had survived the cartel's captivity, and she wasn't about to let them take her again. Ben, though scared, did his parthilping load ammunition, securing escape routes and memorizing hiding spots. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the ranch stood like a fortress, ready for battle. Then came the sound they had been dreading. Engines. Multiple engines. Jack stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, as headlights lit up the distance. Dust plumes rose as a convoy of black SUVs and motorcycles roared toward them. Miguel Diaz had arrived, and he hadn't come alone. The first gunshot cracked through the night, a sharp warning that the battle had begun. Jack fired first, dropping the lead biker. The cartel retaliated, bullets riddling the wooden fence and shattering windows. Jack ducked behind cover, his military instincts kicking in. He fired in controlled bursts, taking down enemies with lethal precision. Explosive traps set around the ranch detonated, sending cartel gunmen flying as flames lit up the battlefield. Emma, positioned on the rooftop with a rifle, provided cover fire. Her hands trembled at first, but as she fired shot after shot, a new kind of determination took hold. She wasn't running anymore. Ben huddled inside, following Jack's instructions. Stay low, stay hidden, stay alive. Through the chaos, Miguel advanced, a shotgun in hand and fury in his eyes. He wanted Jack dead, but he wanted him to suffer first. Jack met him in the clearing, both men battered but unbroken. No more running, old man, Miguel sneered, leveling his shotgun. Jack's lips curled into a smirk. I wasn't the one running. Miguel fired. Jack rolled aside, coming up with his knife. The two clashed in a brutal, close-quarters fight. Fists, blades, and sheer will collided as they struggled for dominance. Miguel, younger and stronger, fought like a wild animal. But Jack had experience. A feint, a pivot, a precise strike to the ribs. Miguel gasped, staggering back as Jack's blade sank into his gut. He choked, dropping his weapon, his eyes wide with disbelief. You think this ends with me? He rasped. Jack pulled the knife free. Number, but it's a start. Miguel crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror ending with a final rattling breath. The last echoes of gunfire faded. The cartel's forces, leaderless and broken, retreated into the night. Jack stood among the wreckage, bloodied but victorious. Emma rushed to him, relief washing over her. It's over, she whispered. Jack looked around at the bullet-ridden walls, the scorched earth, the blood-stained ground. No, he said quietly. It's just beginning. Over the next days, the family repaired what they could. The ranch still stood, scarred but unbowed just like them. Ben, once terrified, now carried himself differently. Stronger, wiser. Emma, once a victim, now spoke of helping others who had suffered as she had. Jack had won the battle. But deep down, he knew war had a way of finding men like him. As the sun set, Jack sat on the porch, a quiet moment of peace settling over the land. But in the distance, beyond the tree line, a figure watched. They were waiting, watching, planning. Jack exhaled, eyes narrowing. He had faced death before, and he was ready to do it again. The ending of the story revolves around survival, resilience, and transformation. Jack, once a man seeking peace, is forced to embrace his warrior past to protect his family. Emma evolves from a victim to a fighter, determined to help others, while Ben's innocence is replaced with newfound strength. Though they win the battle, the scars remain, symbolizing that true peace is fragile. The lingering presence of a mysterious figure hints that violence is cyclical. An enemy may fall, but another always rises. In the end, family, courage, and the will to fight back define their journey, ensuring they remain unbroken.